Now let's take a look at what's grabbing headlines here in France. Lots of focus on that speech that we talked about right at the top. President Emmanuel Macron gave in Versailles yesterday. A rare address to both houses of Parliament. Macron outlining what he plans to achieve during the next 5 years, Flo.
It certainly is the major story in the press today. A lot of people say it really marked the beginning of Macron's presidency. La Croix, the Catholic paper, talks about his social contract. He has a very ambitious plan for the next 5 years. He outlined the principles that will guide his action, and he wants to do a lot of action, carry out a lot of things, a considerable amount of things. For instance, he wants to reduce the number of lawmakers in Parliament by a third. He wants to introduce proportional voting to make the Parliament more politically representative. And then, of course, he wants to overhaul France's labor code and law, etc. Get ready for some major changes, says La Croix.
Is that all? I mean, several papers pointing out it's an incredibly long speech, wasn't it? And also a lot of critics saying it was a little bit vague, though.
It was a very long and solemn speech, according to Libération, but no major announcements came from it. They're a little disappointed. You can see here, they're talking about le flou et la forme. Now, this is a little bit of a play on words. There's an expression in France called le fond et la forme, so style and content. But according to Libération, though there was a lot of style, there wasn't much content. It was very vague. According to Libération, they're upset that Macron didn't talk about more concrete things like social justice or fighting against inequalities. Now, Le Figaro, which is the conservative paper, agrees with Libération on a couple of issues, namely that it was a very long speech. It was interminable, according to Le Figaro. Now, Le Figaro points out that many lawmakers, you know, this is their first time in Versailles looking at such an incredible speech. So many of them seemed a little starstruck, I guess you could say, in awe of the grandeur of the place. A lot of people also seemed relieved when the 90-minute speech came to an end. You might have seen on social media, there were lots of photos of lawmakers looking really bored during this speech. And you can see in this article in Le Figaro, they actually likened it to a presidential homily, if you will. And it seemed like some MPs were caught being a little bored in church.
No yawning allowed. Other papers, actually, they kind of went with some religious imagery, didn't they, to describe the speech and poke a little bit of fun at the president.
Poke a little fun, a little bitter fun when it comes to L'Humanité, which is the communist paper. You can see they're talking here about it, how it wasn't a speech, it was an indigestible sermon in favor of free market economics. They really go for it. They talk about a rosary of platitudes pronounced by a president whose posse brags about his complex thinking. And of course, L'Humanité comes back on the fact that several lawmakers from the left, from the far left, decided to boycott the speech altogether. Now, what's interesting is you see that photo there in L'Humanité. Well, that very same photo is in this article that you will see in L'Obs, which is also going with a religious vibe, if you will. They're talking about the pious pledge of Father Macron. It was a political baptism for many of these newly elected members of parliament, but also for Macron in many ways as well. It was a patriotic communion, a big Republican mass in Versailles. They're also really going all out. They say that Macron is the evangelical priest of the Fifth Republic, which is, of course, the republic that France is in and has been for over 50 years now.
OK, well, that was Macron's speech yesterday. Now, the focus moves on to the Prime Minister Edouard Philippe. This afternoon, he's going to deliver a speech on general policy in front of the Parliament.
And you can see, according to Le Parisien, they're saying, and now it's Philippe's turn. It's definitely a speech week here in France. They're talking about how it's going to be a very different kind of speech, though. Macron's speech was an abstract speech. He was talking about goals and guiding principles and what direction he wants to take. Well, according to Le Parisien and several other French papers, Philippe is going to have to really get into the thick of it, address concrete matters, put some meat on those bones that Macron outlined. So Macron set the course. Edouard Philippe is going to have to deliver precise details as to just how all this is going to happen, whether it's the method or the calendar of these reforms. So lots of papers are saying this is really the tough job.
And several papers, though, saying that Macron's left his prime minister here with a pretty tough task.
That's right. He's leaving the dirty work for his prime minister. That's what Le Figaro says on their front page here. You can see they're saying that essentially, while Macron, was kind of the inspiring prophet yesterday in Versailles, Philippe now has to deal with all the touchy subjects, the thorny issues. So it's a little bit good cop, bad cop, if you will, between the president and his prime minister. And L'Opinion also is talking about this dynamic between the president and the prime minister. You can see they're talking about the republic that Macron has dreamed up of, and now, well, it's up to Edouard Philippe to implement that dream. Now, that cartoon you can see right there is quite interesting. It echoes a chapter in Greek mythology that's quite well known here in France. Apparently, it's not really widely known abroad, but you can see here, you can see Macron depicted as well, Jupiter, the king of all gods. That's really the imagery that a lot of people are associating with Emmanuel Macron these days. And he's talking to his prime minister here. Oh, Hercules, perfect timing. I've prepared a little list of tasks for you to complete. Now, this is a reference to the 12 labors of Hercules, and you might be able to see that bead of sweat rolling down the forehead of Edouard Philippe. So not just a little list of tasks, it's going to be quite massive.
It was a very long piece of paper, wasn't it? Now, finally, a word on Simone Veil. This is the iconic European feminist politician. She died here in France on Friday at the age of 89, rather. A state funeral is going to be held for her tomorrow, isn't it?
That's right, and several petitions have been launched for Simone Veil to be essentially enter the Pantheon. Now, the Pantheon is a secular mausoleum in the heart of Paris containing the remains of distinguished French citizens like Voltaire, Victor Hugo, Émile Zola. So you have a lot of writers, but also scientists. Many resistants more recently were allowed to enter the Pantheon. And now a lot of people want Simone Veil to enter the Pantheon as well. Le Monde talks about several petitions. About 300,000 people have signed 2 main petitions online for her to be able to enter the Pantheon. It certainly would be a symbolic move for her to enter the Pantheon. And these are people from across the political spectrum who want her to enter the Pantheon. How does it work? What's the instruction manual for actually entering the Pantheon? Well, you can read about it here in Le Monde. Essentially, it has to be done by official decree. And who gets to go into the Pantheon? Well, someone who deserves national recognition. So it's a little bit vague, but a lot of people seem to think that Simone Veil certainly deserves to enter the Pantheon, which there's a little bit of history in here as well. The Pantheon was originally a church, actually, but during the Revolution, it became this very secular mausoleum. The idea was it to be a burial ground for heroes of the Republic in kind of the way kings were buried in sacred burial grounds, but this is a secular burial ground. Now, apparently, and you can read more about it in Le Monde, Simone Veil's granddaughters say that her Pantheonization, I guess that's what they're calling it, isn't in the cards for now. Why is that? Well, apparently she didn't want to be separated from her husband, who is buried at the Montparnasse cemetery in Paris. So it might happen, but it might take some time for it to actually happen.
Not a lot of women in the Pantheon.
Not a lot of women, so it would really be symbolic for her to enter. There are some women, though, thankfully.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, thank you very much, Flo. Of course, we'll cover the details of that funeral on the programme tomorrow, I suspect. Thanks very much, Flo Vilmonet, with the papers on France 24.